Yeah, so literally whenever you guys are ready to.
Good afternoon. My name is Ann Bishop. I'm the Operations Director for the Public Utility Commission.
I'm Kyle Landes-Martinelli, General Counsel of the Commission.
And today we were going to talk about EPUC and the Public Utility Commission's performance standards. First, I wanted to explain EPUC has 4 components to it: online filing, public access to case information, including public documents, electronic document management, and case management. Most of the time, when we talk about EPUC, we refer to the first 2 of these bullets, and that's the public interface, if you will. And in FY18, public use of EPUC is as shown on this slide, and I'm putting public in quotes because I'm including basically anybody who's not a commission employee in this. So we had more than 12,700 filings that were made in EPUC, and about 20% of those were made by other state agencies who participate in our cases, like the Department, Agency of Natural Resources. More than 20,000 documents were filed in EPUC. More than 95% of the parties in our cases choose to participate using EPUC, and that is actually, I did put that in the present tense deliberately because that's continued to be the case. And we have more than 2,400 subscribers to cases. These are people who are not the official parties, but they choose to receive automatic email notifications of any subsequent filings and documents issued by the Commission in those cases. These are not necessarily individuals. The same person can subscribe to multiple cases. This just counts the number of times somebody subscribed to a case, so they're not necessarily unique individuals.
And just so I'm clear, I haven't used EPUC, but if there's a particular filing on, maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's mine, maybe it's somebody in my town that I want to file, I could log in and subscribe to that particular case.
Yes.
So that whenever anything comes out, I'll know there's a new document to look at.
Exactly.
Okay.
The parts of EPUC that we tend not to talk as much about are the behind the scenes, or the things that only the Commission employees use. The electronic document management component, it's behind the scenes. I don't think we need to talk anymore about that. That's pretty self-explanatory. But the case management side of things, I think deserves a little more explanation. This is the tool that Commission employees use when we schedule hearings and other events. We use it to add filing deadlines to the case schedule. We use it to keep track of assigned cases. Which hearing officer is assigned to which case. The software provides us with workflow tasks. For example, when a new case comes in that requires a review to make sure that it's complete, that it's met all the requirements for filing that kind of a case, a task will go to the person who's assigned to say, review this case, see if it's complete. At the end of that, you either write something that says it's complete, or you write something that says it's not complete, along with, that includes a detailed list of what's missing. And depending on whether it's complete or not, different tasks follow from that. So it helps make it easier for our staff to see what the status of a case is and what's coming up next. There are additional predefined searches that we use to help manage our overall workload. There are many searches that are available to the public on the portal in EPUC, where you can find cases and documents. These are more management searches that help us keep track of what we're doing. We have predefined templates that let us quickly produce standard documents with case information automatically filled in. So for example, if you're issuing a hearing notice, it's very simple to automatically generate. It looks the same every time, and it just has case-specific information and specific information about that hearing, and it helps us do our work more efficiently. We also use it internally to issue commission orders and other documents. That includes signing orders electronically. Are there any questions about the case management aspects of EPUC? It's a tool that we use to help us process our cases and keep track of the status of things.
Can I ask a question? Is it easy to use? Does everybody find it very helpful for tracking all this information?
So I may be a bit biased because I played a role in developing it. I think it is fairly easy to use. Yes, it's a huge step up from where we were before, but I might turn to Greg Faber is here, and he's lived in the pre-EPUC world as well as the post-EPUC world.
It's fairly easy. It's Greg Faber, Public Utility Commission. It's fairly easy to use. Once you've used it a couple of times, you get the hang of it, just like any computer program. It's fairly straightforward.
So you develop it internally, develop it in-house?
It's a software product. It's an off-the-shelf software product that we contracted with a vendor.
To customize for your
and
purposes.
we configured it for our purposes,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah. Okay.
Just a quick question on the second bullet point there. Using predefined templates to quickly produce standard documents. That's from your perspective or from the applicant's perspective, or both?
I would say it's our perspective
Okay.
that we're quickly producing a hearing notice. For example,
Okay.
the
So it's like-
applicant wouldn't know how long did it take us to put that together. We also are our templates. So for example, if you have an order where, like a Section 248 order, where you have various criteria that you have to consider, those headings can appear. It's like a boilerplate template. So it just saves the hearing officer time in having to we don't have to start from scratch each time to put the document together.
But then every line in there is often referring to specific parts of the record, and so those have to be changed to cite to the testimony that supported each criteria that's being discussed.
Exactly. What it enables us to do is allow the hearing officers to focus on substantive aspects of writing the order and making sure that it's supported by the record.
Yeah.
And you might have a lengthy discussion if something like aesthetics is being challenged in a particular proceeding, and obviously nothing on that is going to pop up in a template.
Go ahead.
So, and if this is coming up further in your presentation, please let me know. With regard to timing, how does EPUC, how does it in practice let you know, like how do you use it to let you know about timing? Do you get overall reports from it? And that's a do you, not can you.
So, yes, that's a really nice segue into where I was headed next, which gets to our performance standards. The Commission uses a time to disposition performance standard. This is recommended by the National Center for State Courts, and the Vermont Judiciary also uses this measure. It counts all cases that are disposed of or resolved in a particular fiscal year. And it measures the percentage that were resolved within the standard or the goal for that type of case. And we started using this when EPUC was implemented. So before EPUC, we did not have a case management system. We were completely paper-based. And if you were to ask us to calculate how long it took us to resolve cases, that would have been a manual calculation for every single case. It was not practical to try and do. We went live with EPUC in several phases during calendar year 2017. So since that time, we have been able to use it for this performance standard to automatically give us information on when a case was filed, when it was considered complete, and then when the date was that the order was issued, and calculate the difference for us.
How often do you measure that? Do you check?
We report on this as part of our budget submission to the administration as well as to the legislature. And we periodically go through, we don't necessarily run the full report each time, but every couple of months we go through with the hearing officers and look at their cases and say, you know, where do things stand, and are there cases out there and are shown in our system still as open that really should be closed now because any required compliance filings have been made, that sort of thing.
So is there any sort of alert that the system kicks out, like it has been, you know, twice the expected time, or
No,
you
we
don't
have
the
not
right
configured the
filings?
system that way. We get every time a filing is made in a case, or every time there is a we call them time standards in the system. A filing deadline, for example, that something was supposed to have happened by. The hearing officer assigned to the case gets a notification, shows up as a little bell on their computer screen that something either has happened or the deadline for something just passed. We have used those primarily for formal schedules in a case. We have not used them to date for the time to disposition goals.
Are you done?
I'm percolating.
You're thinking.
Go ahead.
Could you configure it to use it for those deadlines?
We could.
Yeah.
We can
That
have.
that capability is in the system.
Yes.
Yeah. So I was also thinking about the how you could measure the cases that aren't disposed of, that are still in process somehow, and how stale they are. I'd say. See what I'm getting at. So as a different kind of
A
performance.
list of
measure.
pending cases.
Well, not only a list, but a metric, a yardstick of the cases that aren't disposed of. It's not a time to disposition, but it's a how stale. How many stale cases do we have, and how stale are they? You know, that sort of thing.
So what I would say first of all is that whenever the case is done, say a case was filed in one fiscal year but it's not resolved yet, so it's pending at the end of that fiscal year. It's not counted in the time to disposition for that year.
Right.
The following year, when it is resolved, the full length of time would appear.
Right. Right.
We certainly can run reports that say, show me a list of all your pending cases. And in fact, there's one on our website for the portal that anyone can use to look at and see the list of cases that are open right now.
Right.
I think EPUC has very robust search capabilities. I haven't explicitly looked into creating the exact search that you are getting at, but from a conceptual standpoint,
Right.
it should be possible.
Right. I mean, so obviously, we've heard from some people, probably, just that there are a few outlier cases that wind up taking way longer than they should and whatever. So it seems like it might be useful to have that capability to be able to track the cases that seem to be falling through the cracks somehow, and try to catch those before they get too far down into the floorboards.
Well, and I'll say that may be a management tool. One of the things that we're wrestling with in this committee is testimony that we've heard that this measurement shows what's been done as opposed to kind of what's being worked on, and concerns that the time to disposition figures aren't necessarily a fair representation of challenges with what's in the pipeline. I don't know if that's true or not, but so time to disposition doesn't necessarily allow us to say, yep, that we see that too, or not. It says what's been done as opposed to kind of what is kind of caught in the pipeline. So I think that's where that question comes from. Not that it would, maybe it would be a helpful management tool. I won't be so presumptuous to say that. I'm kind of reacting to.
I've made a note here
Yeah.
to look into.
Over a long period of time, obviously, time to disposition works because everything gets disposed of eventually, right?
Right.
But it's just in the short term.
I do want to say that the commission understands and shares the desire that we are processing cases appropriately, and that includes in a timely manner, making sure that we're allowing time for due process for everything. But we're not perfect.
No.
I'm sure that
Nobody
there
expects
are cases where something took longer on our end, but there are also cases that some of them take a while because the parties have asked for additional time.
Sure.
Either in some cases asked us to stay the case completely, or have asked for additional time to negotiate because some concerns have been raised, and they want to try and work them out because in the long run, that would take less time than to fully litigate them.
So I think that's one kind of strain of what we're trying to understand, and another, I guess I'll put it in a category of understanding, is trying to support a predictable process. Greg was in here earlier this week, but kind of juxtaposing that with how things may work in the telecom world. Understanding that's not a perfect analogy. So I think the questions have arisen not only around time of disposition for things that are in the pipeline, but also trying to meet a standard of predictability for people who are, and maybe we're getting to that.
We're getting to that.
Okay.
So, with respect to a time to disposition performance standard, this is some information. Vermont Judiciary reports on this in their annual statistical report, and this is a quote that I wanted to bring to the committee's attention. According to the judiciary, it is important to note that it would be very rare indeed for every case to be decided within the disposition goal. If that were the case, the goal is probably too high and should be lowered. Typically, if the percentage decided within the disposition time standard is around 80 to 85%, it probably means that the court is doing well, provided that the cases that exceeded the goal did so within a reasonable margin. And for comparison purposes, we also looked at the Environmental Division of Superior Court and the information they included in, again, the same statistical report about the disposition goals for their cases. And again, this is a quote. They say, "It is difficult to measure performance based on the age of environmental cases because there is so much variation in the average time to disposition from one case type to the next. For Act 250 appeals, the disposition goal set by the Supreme Court is 11 months for standard cases and 13 months for complex cases. For all but the most complex of cases, the Environmental Division establishes disposition guideline schedules that anticipate a disposition in 12 months or less." So that's, and the reason we chose them was simply that an Act 250 appeal is arguably the most analogous to a Section 248 review or a net metering review where we're applying those Section 248 environmental criteria, et cetera, to a case. So this gives you some actual statistics on how we've been doing. Again, this is not the pipeline, set that aside for a moment, but this is looking at historical performance and cases resolved to date. This is actually something I prepared, it's probably been a week and a half ago now for the Senate when I testified in the Senate on this. So cases resolved to date in maybe a week or so out of date. What you'll see is that for net metering, the rooftop systems and the small systems on the ground, that's the up to 3 tracker size systems, follow the simple registration form process. They have simple comment period deadlines, and historically in FY18, about 97% of them were resolved automatically the day after filing because there were no concerns raised by the utility about interconnection. You will see that this year in FY19, that number has dropped a little bit to about 92%. And that's because there are more concerns being raised by electric utilities about interconnection. The medium-sized systems on the ground, we don't get very many of those. These are the 15 kW through 50 kW. As you can see, we don't have very many, and you can see the time periods that we resolve them in. The large systems on the ground are the ones that are 50 kW up through 500 kW. 500 kW project can be 3 to 4 acres of solar panels, and depending on the particular location, the disturbed area could be considerably greater. For example, if there are trees nearby that need to be cut down to because of shading on the panels. There's two things that jump out at me when I look at the statistics, and one of them is that there's a fair degree of similarity in terms of what percentage we're getting done within 120 days and 270 days of filing in these two time periods. And if you keep in mind what the judiciary has said in terms of time to disposition, it looks like from our performance standard that we're reporting on using the 120 days and the 270 days, it seems like our performance is consistent with what the court has been using as a reasonable performance. The other thing that I would just note is that in FY18 there were 14 cases, and in FY19 there were 51. This is because we changed the rates that were paid to net metering systems at the beginning of FY19. And we had a big bubble of applications that were filed shortly before that, the change in rates. We had more filed in 4 weeks than were filed in the previous 12 months. So for me, I consider it to be pretty remarkable that despite the significantly large increase in number of applications of this kind that we received, our actual length of time that it took us to resolve those was as comparable as it is here. In fact, we did a little bit better in FY19. I recognize that this is not looking at cases that are in the pipeline right now that are still pending.
Because we don't know how long those take to resolve until they're resolved.
Well, I'm sorry.
We're gonna ask the
Good.
same question. So,
many were filed?
exactly. So of the cases that are resolved, what percentage is that of the cases that were filed? That would be an interesting, and so we heard testimony to that effect. Of the cases that are resolved, they're resolved in a timely fashion. It's the ones that are not moving or getting resolved.
Okay.
So how could we better understand what is happening with those?
I will say that so the cases that were resolved in FY19, some would be filed in FY19, some were filed in FY18, and there were some that were, there probably were a couple that were filed in FY17. Of those 6 cases that took longer.
Wait, so I just want to make sure I understand. So you're now referencing the large systems on the ground in
Mhm.
cases resolved to date in FY19. We have 54 cases resolved.
51.
50, sorry. So 51 cases resolved.
Yes.
So it's 6 additional cases took longer, or of those 51?
Of those
6 took-
51, 6 took longer.
Okay, and so the question that I have is, and I think Representative Campbell was going there as well, is how many cases were we looking at in FY19? So
th-
do we
those
have
6
100 cases? Do we have 55 cases?
So those 6 cases are the 12% that's not captured by the 88% within 270 days. So it's 6 of 51, which is the 12%.
So
Did you
did
wanna
you
know
have-
how many are still open?
Yes,
That
yes.
might be
The
the
6
simple number.
cases
to
were
that.
resolved.
I
Yeah.
can't tell you
These
that
are all
off-
resolved cases.
Yes.
Yeah, I can't tell you that off the top of my head, but that certainly is something that we can pull the information out of EPUC and get back to you on.
So that is what we had heard the other day, that, you know, maybe there's 1,000 cases, you know, that have been opened, and, you know, maybe half of them, 500, have moved forward, and the timelines have been fine. But what's going on with these other 500?
And yeah, if I could just say 2 things on that. So one, those numbers will be in our performance metrics for the next year. So it's not like we avoid the consequences of things being
Right.
how it shows up at some point. The other thing is it can get very nuanced why different cases do take longer. So I'll just point out 2 things that come to mind right now of cases that have been at the commission for a while, 2 groups of cases. One is we have 8 cases now where they're actually stayed because they're in the Shiite region, and there's a decision that was made, and it was actually applicants and utilities in those cases saying, let's wait on these and see how it plays out. So there's a group of those that are in kind of a holding pattern now, and those will make our numbers look bad when they actually get resolved, because there's not going to be an explanation for that period of time, even though it was often the applicants who wanted us to wait on it. We have another group of cases from last summer when we got that big group that was filed at the end of June, and in some of those cases the applicants had not yet done a system impact study to show whether this could interconnect or what needed to happen to be able to interconnect to the system. Under our rules, you have to actually do that system impact study before you file your application, and some of those applicants asked for a waiver of that, and the commission granted a number of those waivers. So we have a group that at the applicant's request were put on a holding pattern until that study was completed. And actually just in recent months, some of those studies have been completed, and then we go back to processing those cases. So some of those things that can come up and are difficult to capture or address when you have statutory deadlines in a case.
And so, I mean, I presume that you know, when there's a delay, I mean, there's a reason for the delay, but it sounds like, you know, from time to time, there could be something that happens where, you know, we have a pause in the case and nobody knows why. How does that get monitored internally? Like, how would you be alerted to that? That's the piece that I'm interested in, not, you know, like, the parties have agreed that we need to do this study, or, you know, those things are just part of the law, right? But if there was a oops, or it's put down, and what we actually heard was that there needs to be a better case management, process in terms of fail-safing that, like moving it through, just, you know, if it isn't some agreed upon stay or study.
So I think what you're asking is, are there things we can put in place at the commission to monitor those cases that are pending, to make sure that we are moving them forward to the best of our ability, and that things are not being held up because of commission practices or resource constraints?
Or falling through the cracks, particularly with new fees that we're putting in. You know, folks want to just know that they understand what the process is and how that, you know.
So just to follow up, so there's that dimension of it, and sort of internal management, but then there's also the metrics or whatever, the way we and this committee or you know, others can who aren't as deeply involved as you are in the nitty-gritty of it can understand what's going on. So you just categorized some of the ones that you know are pending. So it seems like it would be useful to try to group some of the ones that, so we have 500 cases that are in the pipeline. They're in process right now. We know that 25 of them are on pause by agreement with both parties. We have 20 of them we're waiting for more information from the applicant. Things like that. That would be useful information, I think.
Yep. Yeah, I think we can do that.
So this was just trying to explain a little bit why do some cases take longer than others. And fundamentally, location matters. The potential for environmental impacts, aesthetic considerations, electric grid constraints, as well as the neighbors and the host town's interest in the project, all affect how long a case takes the commission to process. And when concerns are raised about a proposed project, more process is necessary to give all the parties to a case the opportunity to address those concerns through written filings and possibly evidentiary hearings.
And we are one of the only agencies whose decisions are appealed directly to the Vermont Supreme Court. And so that creates more of a burden to really dot every I and cross every T on bringing in all the evidence, looking at all of it, and making decisions that will be upheld if they're appealed, and the court will be upheld if the court agrees with the reasoning in them, and not be overturned for a due process issue or ignoring an evidentiary issue, something like that. And as general counsel, that's something that can fall on me and be a responsibility for me to make sure we're doing these things right. And so that's something that is important to think about when we're looking at time constraints. And I think it's one reason with the judiciary that often they have more guidelines, but they don't put an actual statutory deadline on. There's other issues with doing that to the judicial branch, but part of it is what you saw from the Vermont Supreme Court's report, that different cases might have issues that require more deliberation, more legal research, and some of that we may be able to update the parties on where something is in the pipeline, but we're also in a quasi-judicial capacity, and so it might be that we're looking at a legal issue more deeply than any of the parties realized it was going to be looked at, and that wouldn't be something we could necessarily convey.
Mm-hmm.